On a sweltering July night in Boston, the kind of night where the air itself felt heavy and restless, a phone rang inside the modest home of Malcolm Ashley. The shrill tone cut through the silence, and as soon as he picked up, the voice on the other end carried the weight of dread. His daughter Lauren, his only child, his pride, his heart, had not returned home. A friend's voice trembled, explaining she had never shown up for their planned walk, that her phone had gone silent, and now no one knew where she was. In that instant, Malcolm's world fractured. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his keys, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped them, and sped out into the humid night. Every streetlight he passed blurring into streaks of yellow fear. Minutes later, he screeched into the parking lot near the city beach. That's when he saw it, Lauren's red Jeep, parked at a slant as if abandoned in haste. The sight stole the breath from his lungs. He rushed to the driver's side, yanking open the door, his pulse hammering in his ears. Inside sat her bag, her laptop resting neatly on the passenger seat. The windows were rolled down, the interior carrying the faint scent of her perfume mixed with salt air. To anyone else, it might have looked ordinary. To Malcolm, it screamed catastrophe. Lauren would never, under any circumstance, leave her things unattended. Not at night, not here. The beach was almost deserted, save for the low murmur of waves crashing against the shoreline and the distant echo of laughter from a late-night gathering. Malcolm grabbed the flashlight he always kept in the trunk and aimed its beam toward the water. The narrow cone of light sliced through the darkness, bouncing off shards of broken shells and damp sand. He began to walk, calling her name, his voice ragged, desperate, carried away by the sea breeze. Each step felt heavier, as if the sand itself wanted to swallow him whole. He scanned the black horizon, his heart begging for the impossible, that she might stumble out from the shadows, that this was just a mistake, a miscommunication, something he could fix if only he got there in time. But the silence pressed back at him, relentless. The water lapped at the shore with cruel indifference, as if mocking his search. Malcolm's chest tightened as his mind conjured images he couldn't bear. Lauren injured, calling out for him but too far to be heard. Lauren fighting for her life while he stumbled along too late. He swept the beam over the dunes, the rocks, the shallow waves. Nothing. The night gave him no answers, only the echo of his own panic. Behind him, the Jeep sat waiting, a silent witness to whatever had happened. He circled back to it, shining the light over the seats again. The neatness of it all unsettled him even more. Her bag closed, the laptop untouched. Nothing rifled through. It was as though she had simply evaporated, vanished into the humid night air. The absence of struggle made it worse. It suggested deliberation, control. Someone who had the time to erase their presence. Malcolm dropped to his knees in the sand, gripping the flashlight so tightly his knuckles whitened. He whispered her name again, softer this time, like a prayer. He remembered her laugh echoing through the house when she was a child, the way she'd dart into the kitchen after school, chattering about her day, about music rehearsals, about friends. All of that life, all of that joy, now balanced on the edge of this unbearable uncertainty. He wanted to scream, to tear the night apart until it gave her back. But the weight of dread pressed down like a vice. As minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the search became ritual. Shine the light, call her name. Wait for nothing. Every pass of the beam returned the same cruel emptiness. His clothes clung to him with sweat, his throat raw, but he couldn't stop. He refused to leave that shoreline. What if she was out there, just beyond his reach? What if one more sweep of the flashlight could change everything? And yet, as the tide crept higher and the beach grew colder, a truth began to coil in his chest. This was not a matter of being late. This was not a daughter losing track of time. Something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. The Jeep was not a coincidence. The neatly placed bag was not oversight. The night had swallowed Lauren whole, and the silence of the waves told him she wasn't coming back. Still, Malcolm searched, his figure a lone silhouette against the dark stretch of ocean, a father unwilling to surrender to despair. Every beam of his flashlight, every hoarse cry of her name was defiance, a refusal to let go of hope, even as dread dug its claws deeper. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would not end with dawn. From the moment she entered the world on an April morning in 1993, it was clear that Lauren Ashley carried something rare within her, an energy that seemed to light up every room she walked into. She was small in stature, barely reaching 5 feet, but her presence was impossible to overlook. She had a voice that could fill a church, eyes that carried a spark of kindness, and a willpower that made even the most ordinary days feel touched with purpose. Her childhood in Boston was not extravagant or marked by privilege, but it was steeped in love, discipline, and the steady guidance of two parents who believed deeply in values like honesty, empathy, and resilience. Lauren absorbed those lessons as if they were the very air she breathed. While other children might shy away from responsibility, she sought it out. At 12, while many kids spent their summers glued to television or wandering malls, Lauren was on the streets of New Orleans, helping victims of Hurricane Katrina rebuild their lives. The sight of devastated homes and families changed her. It ignited in her a lifelong conviction that she could, in her own way, mend the world. It would not be the last time she returned. Twice more, she convinced her friends to travel back with her, organizing fundraisers and gathering supplies, leading them into communities where the water had receded but the pain still lingered. Her teachers noticed it too, the way she combined charisma with compassion. In the classroom, Lauren wasn't just the girl with perfect attendance or high grades. She was the one who stayed behind after lessons, listening to classmates unravel their troubles, offering comfort with the sincerity of someone far older than her years. Her smile carried weight. It wasn't superficial. It said, "I see you. I care." And for her peers, that meant everything. But Lauren wasn't only heart and empathy. She was a force of talent. Music coursed through her like blood. She sang in the church choir, lent her voice to the high school's a cappella group, and earned solos that left audiences stunned into silence. The moment she stepped into the spotlight, nerves melted away, and what emerged was power, pure, unfiltered, honest sound that resonated deep in the chest of every person listening. When she landed the lead in Annie at the local arts center, no one was surprised. What did surprise people was how effortlessly she balanced it all. The rehearsals, the sports teams, the orchestra practices, the endless list of community events she poured herself into. Soccer, tennis, youth symphony, choir, volunteering. She never seemed to tire. Her schedule was packed so tightly that friends joked she must have discovered a secret 25th hour in the day. And yet, for all her commitments, she never grew distant. She showed up fully, genuinely, for the people around her. When a teammate needed encouragement, she was there. When a neighbor's child struggled with homework, Lauren found time to help. Even strangers who crossed her path described feeling uplifted by a single encounter. Her energy was contagious. People didn't just admire her, they wanted to be like her. She became a quiet trendsetter at Wayland High, not because she chased attention, but because she embodied something everyone longed for: authenticity. In a world of cliques and shallow reputations, Lauren stood apart, carving her own space with laughter, determination, and an unwavering belief in the good. And then there were her dreams. With senior year approaching, Lauren was at the edge of something vast and thrilling. She applied to Elon University in North Carolina, a place where she imagined stretching her wings even further, joining choirs, maybe studying music or community leadership, continuing her path of blending art and service. For her, college wasn't just a continuation of school. It was a gateway into a life she envisioned with vivid clarity, one filled with purpose, adventure, and the chance to use her gifts on a larger stage. Her friends saw it too. They often spoke about how she was destined for something extraordinary. She wasn't chasing fame or fortune. She wanted to matter, to leave a mark on people's lives that would ripple outward in ways even she couldn't predict. She dreamed of organizing charities, performing for causes, maybe even teaching children someday. Those were the building blocks of her future, the kind of foundation only a handful of teenagers could articulate, let alone pursue with such passion. Looking back, it feels cruel to consider how much light Lauren carried, because it underscores the darkness that would later consume her story. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't careless. She was prepared to build something meaningful from the very start. And when you think of that, the 12-year-old standing in flood-wrecked neighborhoods handing supplies to strangers, the high school senior pouring her soul into music, the daughter who made her parents beam with pride, it becomes impossible not to feel a deep, aching sense of loss. Lauren Ashley was a girl whose life embodied movement, generosity, and song. Her days were filled with notes of melody and laughter, with small acts of kindness that compounded into something monumental. She had already touched more lives by 18 than many do in decades, and as she stood at the edge of adulthood with college acceptance letters and a heart brimming with ambition, the future stretched wide open before her. That future would never come. And that is why her story haunts us, not simply because of how it ended, but because of everything it promised, everything it might have been. When we think of Lauren, we don't just think of what was lost. We think of the light that once shone so fiercely, and how unbearably tragic it is that it was extinguished far too soon. It began, as so many young romances do, with something that looked like perfection. Lauren Ashley, the radiant singer with boundless energy, and Nathaniel Fuja, the tall, broad-shouldered star of Wayland High's football team, seemed destined for each other. Their paths had crossed since childhood, same schools, same town, but it wasn't until their senior year that they truly locked eyes as something more. When they finally came together, it felt to everyone around them like a fairy tale had sprung to life. At first, their love carried the sweetness of youth. They were inseparable in the hallways, laughing between classes, cheering each other on from the sidelines. Nathan, adored by crowds who screamed his name under Friday night lights, had eyes only for Lauren. And Lauren, who could command a stage with her voice, gave him her unwavering attention. Teachers, parents, even classmates whispered that they were the golden couple. Beauty, talent, and charisma bound together. Their relationship in those early days looked like the embodiment of young love, innocent yet electric, full of promise. But beneath the glow, darker threads began to weave themselves into the fabric of their romance. Nathan's admiration soon revealed its sharper edges. What started as protective glances when other boys talked to Lauren grew into probing questions, possessive demands, and long silences when she laughed too freely at someone else's joke. His popularity meant that girls constantly gravitated toward him, but his jealousy was always directed the other way, at her. He began to see shadows where there were none, interpreting her kindness to others as betrayal, her independence as rejection. Lauren, by nature open and generous, brushed it aside at first. She excused the tense stares, the sharp remarks, telling friends he was just insecure, that he cared too much. She believed, as many young people do, that love could soften anger, that patience could heal jealousy. For a while, she bore the weight of his moods in silence. But those moods deepened. The boy celebrated for his athleticism, cheered for his speed and strength, carried a volatility off the field that no applause could tame. The cracks became visible to others one summer night. A party had been thrown beneath a large tent, the kind that glowed with strings of lights and pulsed with music, where recent graduates and friends danced away their last carefree months before college. Lauren was radiant that evening, her laughter spilling through the crowd, her energy infectious. Nathan, however, was drunk, his movements unsteady, his gaze fixed on her with a mix of longing and resentment. He had tried throughout the night to pull her aside, to plead for more time, to insist that what they had wasn't over. But Lauren had grown weary of the cycle. Break up, reconcile, fight, repeat. She stood her ground, told him to leave her alone. Something inside him snapped. In a sudden violent surge, Nathan stormed across the dance floor and slammed his fist into one of the tent poles. The entire structure shuddered, then collapsed inward, lights crashing down, tables tipping over, music screeching into silence. For a moment, chaos reigned, screams, scrambling feet, bodies rushing to get clear of falling fabric and metal. The joyous gathering dissolved into panic in seconds. And at the center of it all stood Nathan, breathing heavily, eyes blazing, while Lauren, pale and shaken, tried to comprehend what had just happened. That night was a turning point. Though the tent was quickly raised again and the party limped forward, the atmosphere never recovered. People whispered, casting wary glances at Nathan, some openly telling him to leave. For Lauren, the incident planted a fear she couldn't fully articulate. This wasn't the boy she thought she knew, the popular athlete with a charming grin. This was someone else, entirely. Unpredictable, explosive, capable of turning celebration into chaos with one strike. Friends began to warn her more directly. They saw what she didn't want to admit. that Nathan's love was not gentle but consuming, not steady but combustible. He clung too tightly, demanded too much, and when denied, he unraveled. Yet Lauren, compassionate to her core, struggled to walk away completely. She carried the hope that the boy she once adored could be salvaged from the storm brewing inside him. The party incident lingered in the minds of everyone who witnessed it. For the students who once envied their romance, the golden sheen was tarnished. For Lauren, it was the first undeniable glimpse of a truth she had been trying to ignore. The love that had once made her feel special was curdling into something dangerous. And for Nathan, it was the public display of an inner rage that, unchecked, would soon consume them both. Looking back, that night felt like foreshadowing, the moment where a crack of thunder split the horizon before the storm arrived. What had begun as an innocent, enviable love story was already darkening into something toxic, something that would not end with smiles and future plans, but with heartbreak, fear, and the shadow of tragedy waiting just beyond the lights of a high school tent. By the spring of 2011, Lauren Ashley had reached a decision that would define the final months of her young life. After years of the same exhausting cycle, brief moments of tenderness followed by jealousy, arguments, and reconciliation, she realized she could no longer carry the weight of Nathaniel Fuja's love. Senior year had opened her eyes. The world stretched wide before her, filled with possibilities she couldn't seize if she kept tethered to a relationship that drained her spirit. On her 18th birthday, she ended things. To her friends, she confided that it was one of the best decisions she had ever made. For Lauren, the breakup was liberation, a chance to step forward into a future she had worked tirelessly to create. But for Nathan, the same moment felt like annihilation. What Lauren saw as freedom, he experienced as abandonment. Once celebrated as a star athlete, admired by classmates, Nathan now began unraveling. His football practices slipped first, then his social life, until all that remained were long, idle hours sprawled across the couch, his body present but his mind far away. His once disciplined training gave way to bottles of cheap liquor and the haze of marijuana. Friends who had cheered with him on Friday nights stopped visiting. His world narrowed to a suffocating loop of substances and sorrow. This collapse didn't just frighten his parents, who watched their son sink deeper each day. It weighed heavily on Lauren too. Despite everything, despite the pain of his jealousy and the volatility of his temper, she still carried compassion for him. She had loved him once, and she could not harden her heart completely. The thought of Nathan alone in that dark spiral tugged at her conscience. She didn't want him back, not in the way he wanted, but she couldn't erase the memories of the boy who once made her laugh under the lights of a football field. It left her suspended in a tormenting contradiction. Fear and pity intertwined. On one side was the gnawing unease she felt whenever she recalled his outbursts, the way his anger could ignite without warning. On the other was the voice inside her that whispered he was just lost, just hurting, and maybe she could be the one to help him find his footing again. That tension sat heavy on her chest, leaving her restless, torn between walking away forever and reaching back with one final gesture of kindness. Her friends, however, saw the danger clearly. They knew what Nathan had become in the months since their split. They saw the glassy eyes, the unpredictable mood swings, the way he clung to the past like a lifeline. Time and again they urged her, "Don't go back, don't answer his calls, don't give him hope." They could see what she didn't want to admit, that Nathan's obsession had crossed a line, that what he called love was really control, and that rekindling even a sliver of connection could lead to disaster. But Lauren was not built to ignore suffering, even when it endangered her. Each time she heard about Nathan's decline, each time someone mentioned how far he had fallen, guilt pricked at her. She wondered if she was partly responsible, if her choice to leave him had triggered a collapse too deep to reverse. She carried that weight in silence, not realizing how dangerous such empathy could be when placed in the hands of someone unwilling to let her go. By early summer, her resolve had weakened. Nathan reached out again, his words threaded with desperation, and this time Lauren hesitated. She rationalized it to herself. One meeting, one conversation, not to rekindle but to ease his pain, to remind him that he could move forward too. She didn't tell her friends. She knew they would stop her. She didn't even tell her parents. Somewhere in her heart, she must have sensed their fear would echo her own. So she agreed. Just once more, she thought. One final encounter to close the door gently rather than slam it shut. She convinced herself that kindness could soften the sharp edges of his heartbreak, that compassion could be a balm for his spiraling despair. What she didn't see, what perhaps no 18-year-old could fully grasp, was that for Nathan, there was no just once more, there was only possession, only the refusal to release what he believed belonged to him. And so, with the weight of pity outweighing the instinct of self-preservation, Lauren chose to meet him. It was a choice born of empathy, the same empathy that had defined her life, the same empathy that had driven her to disaster zones to help strangers. Only this time, that empathy was turned towards someone who mistook it for invitation, who saw her compassion not as a gift, but as a second chance at control. That decision, quiet and private, marked the turning point. It was the step across an invisible threshold, the moment when her story shifted from hope into tragedy. And though she could not know it then, agreeing to see Nathan one last time would become the most dangerous choice she ever made. July 3rd, 2011. The day had been long but ordinary for Lauren Ashley. She had started her shift at the mall in the morning, greeting customers with her trademark smile, folding clothes with a precision that spoke of both discipline and pride. She laughed with coworkers, made plans to meet friends later that evening, and talked with her father about coming home for dinner. To anyone watching her, it looked like the vibrant life of a young woman on the cusp of adulthood, hours away from celebrating freedom before college began. But as the sun dipped behind the skyline and the air grew thick with summer humidity, the threads of normalcy began to fray. At 6:45 p.m., security cameras caught Lauren leaving the mall, her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking to Nathan. That conversation, mundane to anyone else, would later take on the gravity of a final act. Data recovered by investigators showed what came next. A simple text message, just one word. Here, sent at 7:05 p.m. to Nathaniel Fuja. It was unassuming, the kind of text exchanged countless times between teenagers waiting outside each other's houses. Yet in hindsight, it carried the weight of finality. It was the last message Lauren would ever send. The neighborhood where Nathan lived was quiet that evening. His parents were away, leaving the house in a silence broken only by the hum of cicadas and the distant rumble of passing cars. Lauren pulled into the driveway, her Jeep parked neatly by the curb. She stepped out, unaware that the air itself seemed to thicken with foreboding. Carrying the lightness of someone still believing in kindness, she approached the door, perhaps rehearsing in her mind what she would say. A few words of reassurance, a reminder that they had to move on separately, that he could heal too. The door opened, and she crossed the threshold into a house that felt strangely hollow. No music, no chatter, no sign of life, just the stillness of rooms that seemed to hold their breath. She may have paused, sensing the absence of warmth, but compassion drove her forward. For Lauren, walking into that silence was an act of mercy. For Nathan, waiting within, it was an opportunity carved from desperation. What happened next remains hidden in the shadows of that house, known only to the two who were there, and to the evidence later uncovered. What we do know is this: once the door shut behind her, it became the line she would never cross again. Investigators would later describe it in haunting simplicity. The door closed, and from that moment, Lauren never came back out. That sentence, stark and devastating, captures the gravity of the night. This wasn't a moment of reconciliation, nor a chance at closure. It was the collision of two opposing forces, her resolve to move on and his refusal to let go. In that clash, tragedy was inevitable. Outside, the summer night carried on, indifferent. Friends were gathering at the beach, waiting for her arrival, exchanging jokes, checking their phones. Her father, at home, assumed she was on her way to change clothes before heading out again. To the world, Lauren was simply delayed. But inside that house, time had already begun to warp. Minutes bled into something irreversible. The tragedy of that night lies not only in what Nathan did, but in how ordinary the beginning appeared. A girl finishing her shift, driving to a familiar home, sending a short text. Actions so small, so routine, that no one could have imagined they would mark the edge of her life. That is the cruelty of it, the simplicity masking the horror to come. As investigators would later reconstruct the timeline, every detail sharpened into something unbearable. The Jeep parked outside, the bag left untouched, the message frozen on her phone. These fragments became the only proof of Lauren's final choices. She walked into that house with the intention of kindness, maybe even closure. Instead, she stepped into a silence that would consume her. And so the night of July 3rd is remembered not just as the date Lauren disappeared, but as the night hope itself began to unravel. For her family, the unanswered phone call stretched into panic. For her friends, the empty spot at their gathering turned into dread. And for the investigators who would later sift through evidence, it became the starting point of a story that spiraled into darkness. What remains most haunting is the image we can only imagine. Lauren, standing in that doorway, unaware that she was leaving behind the safety of the world she knew, crossing into the last chapter of her life. The door shut, quietly, without protest. And with that single sound, her story moved from possibility into tragedy, marking the moment where an 18-year-old's future was stolen forever. When Lauren failed to return home on the night of July 3rd, her father knew instantly that something was wrong. Malcolm Ashley had learned to trust his daughter's reliability. Lauren was not the kind of girl who disappeared without explanation. She always called, always texted, always kept her word. By 10 p.m., when hours had slipped by without a message, his unease hardened into fear. He picked up the phone and called the police, his voice tight, insistent, unwilling to accept the usual reassurance that young people sometimes wander off. "No," he said firmly, "not my daughter. This isn't who she is." His urgency pressed authorities to act faster than they normally would. While officers began organizing their first sweeps of the area, Lauren's friends gathered at the beach near the red Jeep that had already been found, its windows rolled down, her belongings undisturbed inside. The scene was chilling. To them, that car was more than evidence. It was a symbol of abandonment, a silent signal that something terrible had happened. They refused to leave. All night they waited, forming small huddles in the sand, scanning the dark shoreline as if Lauren might emerge at any moment, smiling, apologizing for scaring them. But she never came. The laughter of other summer nights was replaced by a heavy silence, broken only by the waves. As the hours dragged on, desperation grew. Flashlights cut across the dunes. Parents joined in, calling her name into the darkness. Police dogs sniffed through the brush. But every search ended the same way, with nothing. Each unanswered call, each empty stretch of sand, tightened the knot of dread in their chests. By dawn, fear had hardened into something colder, a sense that whatever they were looking for would not be found alive. That intuition proved horribly correct. The following morning, just before sunrise, a cyclist riding along a desolate road near a marshy area made a discovery that would shatter the community. At first, she noticed something strange floating in the water. She drew closer, curiosity battling horror, until the shape revealed itself. A body. The body of a young woman. Police rushed to the scene. The marsh was eerily still, its stagnant waters reflecting the gray light of morning. When officers pulled the body to shore, the truth became undeniable. It was Lauren Ashley. Only 18 years old, her life had ended in an act of brutal violence. A deep slash marked her neck, the wound so severe that detectives knew instantly it had been the cause of death. Tangled in her hair was an elastic cord, further evidence of a violent struggle. News of her death rippled through town like a shockwave. Wayland, a community that had celebrated her talents and kindness, now found itself united in grief. Classmates who had sung beside her in choir, neighbors who had watched her grow up, teachers who had praised her ambition, all were left stunned, struggling to comprehend how a girl so full of light could meet such a dark end. Vigils began almost immediately. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes piled near the beach where her Jeep had been found. Parents clutched their children tighter, the realization settling in that tragedy could strike even the brightest, safest corners of their world. For investigators, shock quickly turned to determination. Someone had done this, and the brutality of the crime left little doubt that it was personal. The immediate question was obvious: who would want to harm Lauren Ashley? She had no enemies, no history of trouble. Everyone described her as compassionate, trustworthy, and deeply loved. But as officers pressed harder, one detail surfaced again and again. She had recently broken up with her longtime boyfriend, Nathaniel Fuja. To the outside world, he was the picture of promise, a celebrated football player, admired for his skill, once half of the town's most admired young couple. But behind the curtain of public admiration, there were whispers of jealousy, of fights, of a temper that sometimes flared too quickly. Friends admitted they had urged Lauren to stay away from him, that his possessiveness had grown suffocating. And while no one wanted to believe he could go so far, police knew better than to ignore the obvious. Breakups often spark violence, and the statistics pointed squarely in that direction. That morning, as the Ashley family was crushed under the weight of unbearable grief, detectives shifted their focus. The search for a missing girl had ended, replaced now by the hunt for her killer. And from the start, their eyes turned toward the young man who had loved her too fiercely, the one who could not let her go. The investigation had begun, and in its earliest hours, suspicion already circled Nathaniel like a tightening noose. The morning after Lauren's body was recovered, investigators turned their attention to the one place that might hold answers, the Fuja home. Nathaniel had told officers he'd seen Lauren briefly the day she disappeared, but his alibi had already begun to unravel under scrutiny. With a warrant in hand, detectives entered the house, and what they found inside painted a grim, undeniable picture. The first signs were small but telling. On the garage floor, faint streaks of reddish-brown caught the light when luminol was sprayed. Drops of blood, almost invisible to the naked eye, glowed back like damning embers. On a doorknob leading inside, more traces appeared, and in the bathroom sink, diluted smears revealed the unmistakable attempt of someone trying to wash away a crime. These were not random accidents. They were fragments of violence, silent witnesses to something horrific that had unfolded behind those walls. Then came the discovery that shifted the case from suspicion to certainty. In the basement sat a black sports bag. Inside, investigators found a pair of trainers so caked with mud, it seemed as if they had been pulled from the swamp itself. The pattern of soil matched the marshland where Lauren's body had been dumped. Upstairs in the attic above Nathan's bedroom, officers uncovered another chilling cachet. Blood-stained boots and clothing stuffed away as though hidden in panic. The mud clinging to those boots was tested, later confirmed to be identical to that of the wetlands where Lauren's life had ended. More damning still, blood on the fabric matched Lauren's DNA. The house itself had become a map of her final moments, every clue aligning with the brutality discovered in the marsh. For the police, the evidence was overwhelming. For Nathan's family, it was shattering. Beth and Tom Fuja, once proud of their son's accomplishments, now stood in disbelief as their home transformed into a crime scene. Every drawer, every floorboard seemed to betray them, revealing the truth they had prayed not to face. While the Ashleys mourned their daughter's stolen future, the Fujas confronted the unthinkable, that the boy they raised might be her killer. Within hours, Nathaniel's name was no longer whispered in speculation. He was officially wanted. The manhunt didn't last long. Officers found him at his cousin's house in a nearby town, hunched in a corner, silent and pale. It was just after midnight on July 4th when they took him into custody. At only 18 years old, Nathaniel Fuja, once a celebrated athlete with a promising future, was now shackled and charged with murder. Inside the interrogation room, the contrast between the two families became stark. On one side of town, Malcolm and Mary Ashley endured a grief no parent should bear, their voices cracking as they answered questions about Lauren's last known movements, their eyes hollowed by loss. On the other, Nathan sat across from detectives, his posture rigid, his eyes empty, offering nothing. He spoke no words of remorse, no pleas of innocence or guilt, just silence. That silence itself was chilling, a void where emotion should have been. Detectives pressed him, laying out the evidence piece by piece, the blood, the mud, the clothes hidden in the attic. Still, Nathan gave nothing. His demeanor was described later as detached, almost cold, as though he were an observer to his own downfall rather than the central figure in it. For investigators, this refusal to engage underscored what they already believed. This wasn't a moment of blind rage alone, but a crime rooted in control, jealousy, and calculation. The community that had once cheered for Nathan on the football field now recoiled at the revelations. Parents warned their children about the dangers of toxic relationships. Students whispered in the halls, remembering the tent incident and realizing it had been a warning sign all along. The golden boy of Wayland High had become a pariah overnight, his name now synonymous with betrayal and violence. Meanwhile, Malcolm sat in the quiet of his home, clutching the memory of his daughter's laughter. He thought about how she had once described Nathan as charming, how she believed in his goodness despite the cracks she had seen. That belief had cost her everything. The pain tore through him, sharp and relentless, a reminder that the justice system might move forward, but it would never bring Lauren back. The law had tightened its grip. Nathaniel was no longer a boyfriend, no longer a promising athlete. He was a suspect wrapped in undeniable evidence, a young man who had crossed a line from which there was no return. And as he sat in silence, refusing to acknowledge the gravity of what he had done, the chasm between the two families deepened, one clinging to shattered love, the other to an emptiness that could never be filled. The trial of Nathaniel Fuja began in February 2013, nearly 18 months after Lauren Ashley's life was cut short. By then, the town had grown weary of whispers and speculation. They wanted answers, closure, and justice for the girl who had once been their beacon of light. The courthouse was packed on the first day. Families, classmates, and reporters crammed into the benches, each carrying their own brand of anticipation. At the center sat Nathan, thinner than before, his once athletic frame diminished, his face drawn. To the jury, he looked nothing like the boy who had once commanded a football field. Yet appearances mattered little compared to the evidence that would soon unfold. The defense spoke first. His attorney painted a portrait of a young man undone by forces beyond his control. Severe depression after the breakup, chronic head trauma from years of football, and a refusal to seek proper medical treatment. They described a boy spiraling into mental illness, unable to comprehend the gravity of his actions. It wasn't murder, they argued. It was the catastrophic collapse of a damaged mind. His mother's testimony underscored this image. She described countless nights spent worrying, desperate attempts to pull her son out of the darkness, and a home suffocated by his silence. But the prosecution countered with a different narrative, one carved sharply by evidence. They argued that this was not a case of insanity, but of intent. Nathan hadn't simply lost control in a moment of weakness. He had orchestrated the entire encounter. He called her, coaxed her into coming over when he knew his parents were away, led her into the garage, and there executed a crime that bore the hallmarks of planning. He disposed of evidence, changed shoes, hid bloodied clothing, and even staged the abandonment of her Jeep. Every detail pointed to calculation, not confusion. Then came the moment that turned the courtroom into a crucible. A witness, one of Nathan's classmates, recalled an incident from 2 years earlier. They testified that Nathan had once threatened to slit another boy's throat at a dance after catching him talking to Lauren. The words were chilling then, but in the context of her death, they became prophetic. "If you ever go near her again," Nathan had said, "I'll cut your throat." The phrase landed like a knife in the room. Jurors shifted uneasily. Reporters scribbled furiously. And in the front row, Mary Ashley, Lauren's mother, bowed her head, silent tears sliding down her face as she listened to the echo of a threat that had foreshadowed her daughter's fate. The courtroom air grew heavy with each detail of the medical examiner's report. The slash to Lauren's throat, the defensive wounds on her arms, the evidence of strangulation. It was no longer abstract, it was graphic, visceral, impossible to escape. Every time the prosecution spoke her name, it felt like a bell tolling. Nathan sat with his head bowed, sometimes wiping his eyes, though whether from guilt or self-pity, no one could say. His silence was maddening, his refusal to explain offering no solace to the family whose grief demanded answers. The clash between the two sides was relentless. The defense leaned on the language of psychiatry, repeating the diagnoses of severe depression, even suggesting that Nathan had experienced a dissociative break, detached from reality when he committed the act. They pointed to his retreat from the world, his isolation, his refusal of treatment. They wanted the jury to see a boy crushed beneath his own mind. But the prosecution returned again and again to the meticulous aftermath, the cleaning, the hiding, the staging. Those were not the actions of someone detached from reality, they argued. Those were the actions of someone who understood what he had done and who desperately wanted to escape responsibility. For Mary Ashley, sitting in that courtroom was agony. Every word forced her to relive the night her daughter vanished. Every photograph presented in evidence, tearing open wounds that had barely begun to scar. She sat upright, composed, but when the testimony turned to Lauren's final moments, her struggle, the cut that ended her life, her composure cracked. Tears traced her face in silence. She did not sob, she did not wail, but the sight of a mother grieving quietly in a packed courtroom spoke louder than any argument made by attorneys. By the end of those sessions, one truth had become clear. This was not merely a trial about guilt or innocence. It was a trial about how to define the nature of evil. Was Nathan a broken boy, undone by illness and circumstance? Or was he a calculating killer, driven by jealousy and rage? The jury would decide, but for the Ashley family, no verdict could restore what was lost. Lauren's light had been extinguished, and all that remained was the unbearable echo of what might have been. The courtroom was silent when the jury returned. Hours of deliberation had led to a single, irreversible conclusion. The foreman rose, voice steady, and delivered the words that sealed Nathaniel Fuja's fate. Guilty of first-degree murder. In Massachusetts, that verdict carried only one sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. At just 20 years old, Nathan's life as he knew it ended, his future reduced to the walls of a cell. The sound of the gavel striking echoed like a final judgment, not only on him, but on everything that had led to that moment. Gasps and quiet sobs filled the room. Mary Ashley pressed her hands together, eyes closed, as if in prayer while Malcolm sat motionless, the verdict both a relief and a dagger. Justice had been served, but justice could not bring Lauren back. The courtroom air was thick with grief, a reminder that verdicts, however necessary, never truly heal. They only mark the point where the law has spoken, while the heart continues to ache. And then came a moment no one expected. As the proceedings closed and people began to rise, Malcolm Ashley stood, crossed the aisle, and walked toward Nathan's parents. Beth and Tom Fuja looked hollow, their faces lined with the same disbelief that had haunted them since the night of their son's arrest. Before words could form, Malcolm reached out and embraced them. The gesture was simple, but its meaning profound. In the wreckage of two families torn apart, he recognized their pain too. The silence deepened. For a breathless moment, the courtroom forgot sides, forgot the labels of victim and perpetrator. All that remained were parents, one grieving the daughter who would never come home, the others grieving the son who had destroyed his own life. Both families had lost, and in that loss, they were bound together. It was a rare display of grace amid devastation. Malcolm's embrace did not erase the crime or soften the reality of Nathan's guilt, but it acknowledged a deeper truth: that violence ripples outward, claiming more than its direct victim. Lauren was gone, her dreams silenced forever. Nathan, once a boy full of promise, would now grow old behind bars. Two futures obliterated, two families condemned to live with different shades of sorrow. The moment lingered in memory long after the trial ended. It became a testament to the human capacity for compassion, even in the aftermath of unbearable tragedy. Both households walked out of the courthouse with broken hearts, knowing there were no true victors, only survivors of a story that would haunt them for the rest of their days. In the aftermath of the trial, Lauren's parents refused to let their daughter's story fade into silence. Out of unimaginable grief, they built something enduring: the Lauren Ashley Foundation. Its mission was clear: to honor the life their daughter lived and to protect others from the violence that stole her away. They traveled to schools, spoke to students, and raised awareness about the dangers of jealousy, control, and abuse in young relationships. Every word they shared carried the weight of loss, but also the determination to prevent another family from enduring the same heartbreak. Through the foundation, Lauren's legacy became more than tragedy. It became a warning and a light.
She had always given her time to others, whether through music, sports, or service, and now her spirit continued that work in another form, teaching teenagers that love should never hurt, that control is not care, and that safety is not optional.
The video closes with a memory. Lauren on stage, microphone in hand, her voice soaring in song, eyes shining with hope. Over that image, the narrator's words cut sharp and true. Young love can be beautiful, but when twisted into jealousy and control, it can destroy an entire future. And then the final message: direct, unflinching but filled with compassion. Protect yourself, value your safety, and choose relationships that honor who you are. Lauren's story demands nothing less.